Steen Jakobsen is best known for his outrageous predictions, but this is not why he's joining us today. Mr. Jakobsen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, thanks for having me.
Mr. Jakobsen, we'll start by talking about Germany, which is a great topic of preoccupation for you.
It is, because last year this time I was predicting that Germany would flirt with recession, and most people thought I had two heads. But of course the result was that already by Q3 we were pretty much close to recession, and technically we only 0.01 away from actually having a recession in Germany. And the driver of the lack of growth in Germany, I think, is a great story and explains why we are where we are today in terms of growth and deflation. Basically, Germany was dependent netto on the Chinese growth story. The Chinese decided to move from nominal growth to quality growth. That slowed the export orders from Germany. That sequentially also came at the same time as the US reduced its current account deficit from in the neighborhood of $400 billion a year to less than 200, meaning the world is lagging an export market worth $200 billion, of which, of course, Germany was a great opportunistic player and got a big chunk of that. So I knew that export orders would be under attack in the second half of last year. And what is also happening, which is more important looking into the future, is that Germany in '99 bought themselves a protection from the rest of Europe in terms of devaluation, introducing the euro. But now fast forward to 2015, of course, Greece, Portugal, and even Spain is becoming more competitive. So Europe may have a north-south divide, but what I think is interesting and what is my big bet for the end of this year is actually that Southern Europe will do much better and significantly better than the Northern Europe. So that's why I think Germany needs to be center of all analysis you do on Europe going into history and also going into the future.
Well, we'll go back to the Southern Europe statement and speak a little bit about Greece, although we hadn't really planned it. But we'll move on to the US, where things are not quite what was expected. Long-term rates are going down. The Fed is very shy. So what's behind all this?
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve had sort of painted himself into a corner because, of course, they have a dual mandate. On the first mandate, which is full employment, they're doing significantly better. Mind you, much and a lot of the job is actually poorly paid, half-time jobs. But in terms of numbers, they're creating the amount of jobs that you would want to see above 300,000 a month. The second part is the inflation targeting, which has to be at or below 2%. The problem is, as we talk today, that the very, very clean trajectory trend of inflation in the EU is down below 1%. And so they are not fulfilling that part of the mandate. The one thing that sort of the Federal Reserve has been holding on to is that they have seen early signs that the wage inflation not in Germany, but in the US is picking up. But all of a sudden, even that trend is reversing to the downside. So I think at the end of all this is that 2015 is again going to be a year where we keep looking for this mirage, which is the takeoff of US growth. It's not going to happen. First of all, because of this inflationary negative impact on the ability of Fed doing it. And secondly, because I think energy prices, which is 20% of fixed investment in the US, but a far and bigger dominant force in terms of the total operation of the US economy. To give you a rule of thumb here, the US has benefited by 0.5 to 0.7% of positive GDP growth from the energy sector in the last 6 years. This year, it turns negative by at least 1%.
And you're not so optimistic about the flexibility of this shale industry either, because there's a lot of talk about, yes, it's easy to stop and start, but it's not so easy to stop and start.
No, I think one of the mistakes we tend to do is to look at the shale oil industry as an aggregate. What it really is a number of small players who are all thinking that they are too small to actually impact the overall production. But if you have enough small producers all at the same time using this technology to extract shale oil, which means that inside the first 18 months you have 90% of the total production from the field being explored, which means that when you open the field, you have to continue to keep pumping at the field. which means that we have a delayed process in terms of having the ability to shut production down relatively to world market prices of oil, which of course again means that for most of this year is lost in terms of rebalancing and finding a new equilibrium between the excess supply and the lack of demand coming from lower world growth.
Let's move to the UK, which is my personal big concern. Nigel Farage's UKIP, or UKIP as some people call it, is gaining ground, and that might force Mr. Cameron to anticipate the referendum. If this referendum were to take place now, it's possible that the UK would come out of the European Union. What would be the impact?
I think the potential for the UK to say no thank you to be part of Europe would be the biggest challenge to the whole EU institution in its livelihood. Because you have to remember, for a lot of countries, including Germany, UK is the no-sayer. They are the ones that sort of keeps the anger in place and making sure that we don't have a run amok Brussels. The UK has, is an island. They think like islanders. They feel isolated. They don't feel part of continental Europe. And the financial market in the UK, of course, is still the dominant force, not just in numbers, but also in its link into the US and the global market. So, it will have devastating impact on the economy should Nigel Farage and his party be able to get the Britons to say no, thank you to EU. But I think the more intermediate sort of concern is that by June of this year, after the referendum, the general election in the UK, you will have almost three equal sized parties, the Tories, the Labour and the UKIP party, which means that the consensus right now is that the Labour and the Tories, for the first time since World War II, will actually build a coalition government. How that works in practice, I would love to be a fly on the wall to see that negotiation going on. But you have to remember, Sweden made a precedent in terms of making sure that the anti-integration party was kept out of power despite getting a strong mandate. And now we probably see the same, at least try in the UK to keep the UKIP out of power. The irony, of course, is the best way to tone down the UKIP party, the best way to tone down Front National, the anti-immigration party in Sweden, is to let them come into the limelight. So we in the 21st century, we still have this illusion that keeping people out is going to make them less accountable. I think putting people into the limelight will make them more accountable. So I welcome the vote, I welcome the referendum, because I think we have to have an honest discussion about everything, about the EU, the membership, what it costs, how it works, and what is good. I am a pro-European. I'm just against too much Europe. Personally, not that it matters, but I think my view is really 90% of Europeans. We are all Europeans. We feel Europeans. But we're a little bit tired of being told that the problem with the EU is not that we have too much Europe, it is that we have too little Europe. If that is sort of what the president of the EU says, then he has an issue, and we have an issue at voters not being able to tell him this is wrong.
Mr. Jakobsen, thank you very much for joining us.